Let me introduce myself. I'm Nick Smith. Together with Ruth, who's in the webinar, I lead Epion. Epion is a specialist change consultancy. We look to enable effective change by empowering those who are impacted by the change so that they can embrace and embed it. I should highlight we are recording this. That's so that you're able to, we'll make the recording available to you after the event so that you're able to refer to it. And for those who wanted to be here but are unable to do so, that will work also. I've got about 20 minutes of content, which I'll run through. And then after that, please do we'll have time for discussion and questions, but do please put also questions or thoughts in the chat as we go through. I'm checking that you're able to see a title slide at the moment.
Yes.
Okay, so it's must be
Yes,
with
I
you,
can.
Banal, the problem. What are we talking about? Why have we got a title Change Management Wanted, Dead or Alive? And it's really a sense that in a number of, or increasingly, there's a sense that change management gets a bad press, that its time might have passed. And so this webinar is offering some thoughts on why that might be the case, what's going on, what's shifting, and what might be of value going forward. Go through it by thinking about where did change management come from? What's it trying to do? Why might it be needed? Why would we talk about it at all? If that's where it's come from, how do we feel it's performing against that brief, against that objective? Is it on track? Has it lost its way? And is the nature of change that it's supporting itself evolving so that something different might be managed? Something different might be required. Look then at the idea of, well, if spoiler here, if change is changing in this way, what might we do? How might we lead to enable change? What might we lean into? What might we major on? And then finally, a few practical steps that you might take away and be able, with at least some of them, to do something with from tomorrow or from whenever. And as I say after that, certainly time for discussion going forward. So why are we talking about this? Why might we need change management? And I think the answer to that is pretty straightforward. It's that actually as human beings, we're not very good at effecting change in organizations, partly because we find change on occasion scary. There is always some loss associated with any change as well as gain. There are anxiety or mental health challenges that have been exacerbated by COVID. There is a sense, and some of you might want to look at a guy called Richard Sennett in his book, The Corrosion of Character, about how things have changed in the workplace that make changing it more threatening for us. But we're not good at change. Only 30% of change initiatives deliver what they set out to do so. So we might need something that would help us do that better. So a potential need for change management. Where does it come from? I think just doing a quick survey of it, the thing that struck me here is the degree to which it comes from a psychology background. So if one looks at some of the early roots in the 20s and 30s with a guy called Kurt Lewin, it's around social and organizational psychology. If we look at some of the early models that were applied to change management, they come from things like grief models and deriving change curves from how people behave post-bereavement. And then I know in the 80s when consultants begin to pile in, and you get the quality movement coming out of Japan and you get lean models, there's a real emphasis on involving people. So quality movements kind of feature quality circles and the like, so that those who would be impacted by any change are very much involved in defining the change and how it would happen. We get perhaps in the 90s from the likes of Kotter, a sense of trying to formalize and structure how you might go about doing change management. And I think the past 20, maybe 25 years even, we've got all the methods, the toolkits, the certifications arriving. So that would be, for me anyway, a sense of how it's evolved and where it's come from. What does it look like now? I think we'd probably say it's a collection of tools, from change blueprints, impact assessments, stakeholder maps, putting in place change champion networks or whatever, but tools that we use, methods, ProSci, APMG, the Change Management Foundation, Kotter and others. And probably I'd want to say the bringing together, the integrating of disciplines, strategy, change strategy in particular, change management, project management, learning and training, communications, and others perhaps in a long tail. And if you take all that, there's kind of a good flow perhaps from thinking about, well, what change is wanted, how would it impact on people? So how do we help it land well? So I guess I start with a sympathetic view of, you can see why we might need something that's trying to do what change management's doing, some things that are potentially of value, and I note the roots in psychology and involving people. If that's the case, how's it doing now? What's the prognosis? Well, clearly there are times that change management is effective, but there are times when I think too often we see change supporting, not shaping how transformation or how initiatives are done. So, for example, if we believe that ultimately change initiatives and transformations are about people working in different ways, taking on different ways of working, winning hearts and minds to do that, rather than about deploying and mandating new process or delivering new technology functionality, then surely we'd start by thinking about, well, who are the people who are going to have to adopt this? Who are the people who are going to have to work differently? How are they then going to adopt this? What's going to work best for them in terms of timing, in terms of packaging, and so forth? But instead, what we get is we get a program plan geared around functionality, which or around rollouts or deployments. And then change gets asked to support that and make it land better. It feels a bit like, on occasion, building a road with some really sharp bends and some really blind summits, and then saying, please make it safe. So I think too often change is just supporting, not shaping how initiatives are done. Secondly, we too often see it become artifact rather than outcome led. What I mean by that? What I mean by that is that useful or potentially useful artifacts like change impact assessments or benefit mapping or stakeholder maps become tick box exercises. And instead of shaping what we're going to do next, how we're going to help people adopt change and facing out to those people, it faces us inward and away from the people because we've got to get this done for a governance reason and tick the boxes. So if an artifact doesn't help you face outward to those impacted by change, if it doesn't shape what you're going to do, what's the point of it in change management? Thirdly, change management has become a catch-all term for a whole host of important tasks that actually have nothing to do with whether a change is going to be adopted and embedded. I spoke last week with somebody leading another consultancy who said that one of the things they spent quite a lot of time doing for clients was change management. And what they meant was that they built formal business cases, they did demand and capacity modeling, and they did workforce planning, all of which are perfectly important and good things. But they don't actually help change land. They don't actually help people adopt things. Further, this other consultant was surprised that if we did change management, we didn't just do what they did, but we did something different and something more. So change management on occasions actually has nothing to do with managing change in the sense of helping change be adopted. I think next, change too often is, or change management activities too often are discrete rather than integrated. Um, we want to we like situations where there are campaigns going on to engage those impacted by change, and you can't tell whether it's communication that happens to be carrying some learning or whether it's a training initiative that is carrying key messaging, engaging people around the vision. Um, uh, Too often we get something separate. We're asked sometimes by clients to provide people who will lead on change, be business change leads, but don't touch the comms because that's being done over there, and don't touch the learning because that's being done over there. And what you end up with is you end up with a set of discrete activities um, which confuse those who are impacted by change. And if we step backwards further still and look at it, what we've got is we've got multiple change initiatives, multiple programs, often working with the same people uh, who are therefore impacted by a whole set of changes, but each program is doing its own change management activity. At best, we get what we call change fatigue. At worst, what we have is competing change initiatives, seeing who can shout the loudest. We're shouting, it might come down to who can be most creative in engagement, but fundamentally shouting. Finally, I think we get often commoditized tools. If I step into another domain, I can think of organizations who major really heavily on project and program management certifications and methods and tools such as RAID logs. And actually, they're not necessarily the best at achieving program and project outcomes, or even the best at doing program and project management. And my fear is that in change management, we're doing the same thing. Actually, we have tools, certifications, methods, and we're able to display that we're doing that, but we're not actually uh, making a difference in terms of change outcomes too often. We're not providing leadership that transforms and embeds change. So a sense that change management, there's a potential need for it. Some of what it does could be really useful, but it's not quite in a healthy place on occasion, too often. Take on top of that that change itself is changing. We'd suggest four ways in which change is potentially changing and how we need to think of it. The first would be portfolio. We need to, we have multiple simultaneous initiatives, all impacting on the same people at the same time, which we need to manage as a portfolio. And that's not just about prioritizing and sequencing to avoid conflicting activity and to ensure that communications are in line. It's actually treating the portfolio from the perspective of the people impacted by change. So if a finance function has got multiple changes coming at it in terms of org structures, in terms of system upgrades or new systems, in terms of a merger somewhere else, what is it sensible to treat those as, for those people, as three discrete sets of things that would be landing, even if we prioritize and sequence? Or would we think about how we can package them for those in the finance function so that they see one package of change which is spanning multiple domains? A thought. Secondly, change needs to be recognized as being pervasive. Most people experience change in their organizations now as a constant, or certainly near to that, with perhaps occasional pauses, rather than sporadic one-off programs bringing change. But change management still seems to feel like it's focused on projects rather than on equipping organizations and their people to work with and to work in change. Surely now the issue is at least as much about change capacity and change capability across the organization as it is about change impact assessments or change tools for specific programs. And if we believe that the fundamental issue is about enabling people to work with change, to adopt new ways of working, then surely we have to be genuinely and truly people and human-centric. We touched on some of what that might mean in a previous webinar, which we can point you to if you missed that. But we are concerned about what's going on in people's heads and hearts, what they're feeling, what their mindset is, because we don't want the more easily generated malevolent compliance, as one of my colleagues phrases it. What we want is people embracing, stepping into, and embedding change. So that has to recognize, I think, the importance of leadership and relational leadership as modeling cultures, facilitating psychological safety, and more. And finally, if there is so much change, people, it needs to be purposeful and it needs to be prioritized. People need to, want quite legitimately to understand why. One of the changes I think we've seen over the past 10 years is people, yes, still needing to know what's in it for them from a change, but actually being more concerned to understand why the organization needs to do it in the first place. So we need to find a way of balancing the necessity for change with the capacity for doing it, and working that through. So if we pull all that together, a sense of where change management might be missing the mark on occasions, despite a need for something in that space, and with how change is changing, what might we find ourselves majoring on? Where might we put attention if we're going to lead change to enable it to happen well? Well, I think firstly, we might major on building change capacity. We are wary of the idea of change resistance. We prefer to think about disengagement from change, opposition to change as perhaps being to do with a lack of attention or capacity, or with significant levels of organizational stress, which you address by working on psychological safety, which you address by working on leadership behaviors. You might then look at making sure there's clear and compelling organizational narratives. You might look at work on culture to move towards a more open growth mindset culture, for example. Secondly, we might major on integrating at the point of change, and that's what I've talked about in previous slides, the idea that if the finance function has got a whole bundle of different changes coming at it, let's integrate it and package it from the perspective of those receiving it. That means we would think more about launching change than we would about delivering or releasing change. And I might encourage you to think about, or us all to think about, what delivery looks like. And it sometimes looks like the courier who leaves something on your doorstep if you're lucky and then runs. Change initiatives I've seen like that. We might think of release as something that you do with wild animals, or animals into the wild who were never fitted to live in the wild. It doesn't go well. Whereas launch has got intent about it, and direction and purpose about it. Thirdly, we might major on recognizing the relational. And again, this echoes stuff from a previous webinar, where we recognize the impact of the relationship between those who are leading and facilitating change and those who are experiencing the change. And we referenced previously the idea that for therapists, for talking therapists, for counselors, that the biggest prediction of whether counseling will be effective or not is the quality and nature of the relationship between the counselor and the counselee. And the counselor looks to develop a posture of empathy, of integrity, and of unconditional positive regard, not thinking of those who are seeking to change, who are going to want change, or who are having to change as being the problem. Fourthly, perhaps a surprising one, we might pay more attention, or give more attention to explaining things, explaining what's going on, explaining context, connections, events, and futures. Bill Clinton and I think Tony Blair also spoke about one of the key roles of leadership being to explain things. And these are Bill Clinton quotes on the slide. I know one of the big search firms, executive search firms, spoke about one of the things they'd identified as marking out CEOs and CXOs in general, but CEOs in particular, was an ability to be comfortable with ambiguity and complexity, but to simplify that into consistent narrative for their people. Finally, and kind of tying all these together, maybe if this is what change is like and what change is about, our focus shifts from attempting to view change as something we manage, but rather something we enable and facilitate. And that's why we talk about enabling, that if it's about people's mindsets and adopting new ways of working, it becomes very difficult to impose anything other than that malevolent compliance. Rather, we're working with hearts and minds. We're working to equip and empower. And maybe that takes us to the kind of an answer to the question of whether change management is wanted, whether it's dead or alive. The sense we would have would be that what it emerged to do is wanted, helping organizations effect change well to get the results they seek from change. But because the nature and pace of organizational change has changed, because the workplaces have changed, we want something more than the commoditized, fragmented, and tick box exercise that at its worst, change management has become. What we need is change enablement. So if you were going to go back and think, okay, well, what can I do or keep doing from tomorrow? 5 things very quickly. One, and I'm kind of taking them in the order where the one that's most difficult to do comes first, working to the one that we can probably all just get on with. But shaping initiatives for adoption. That's that point about not just accepting a program is a program and change is there to try and help it land well, but it's about thinking from an adoption perspective with the outcome we want to shape the whole initiative, to shape the whole program. Secondly, let's close down discrete change activities where learning is over there and comms is over there. Let's get away from toolboxes and think about recipes, and let's think about integrating them from the perspective of those impacted. Thirdly, tell a story. If we haven't got a story about why we're changing, an organizational story, and a story in which people can locate themselves and place themselves, let's go come up with one. Let's produce something that's compelling, clear, consistent, and coherent. As change leaders, let's explain the change. Let's get out there and build some relationships. Go spend some time with the people who are going to be impacted by change. And yes, that will involve and will include face-to-face on-site stuff. Let's go understand what they do now, how they feel about it, how they do it now, how they feel about the potential for change. Let's build mutual trust. We want them to trust us, but actually we want to get to a position where we can trust them too, because they're not the problem typically. And finally, if you do nothing else, if we all do nothing else, let's stop creating change management artifacts that make no difference. In other words, let's do the small things and some of the bigger things that help us to enable change rather than manage it, and to empower those who are impacted by it so that it does get embedded, so it does deliver. That's the content I wanted to run through. I'd be delighted to take comments, to take questions. Who's got something that they'd either want to ask or offer as a thought? Mark.
So much of what you said is reflected in what I'm seeing in the organization that I'm in at the moment. There's a lot of tools, there's a lot of tick boxes, but it's not transformational project management leadership in a way. The people are all very good as individuals in what they do, but the projects tending to be road car crashes because they're just not not driven correctly. And you know, I can see so much of what you've been talking about in what I'm experiencing where I am.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Patrick.
Hi, thank you for that. Following on from Mark's comments, really, I can see a lot of the key kind of challenges and watch outs that you've called out in the presentation. I think fortunately, I feel like where I work, we're in a good position. We've just delivered a significant phase of transformation with plenty of lessons learned, and we're looking to do a bit of a repivot on all aspects of how we deliver our transformation and change portfolio, but in particular there are plenty of lessons to be learned, which you've rightfully called out in terms of how we need to be leading on change management for the next chapter that we're going into. And I think particularly that point around the fact that we need to be shaping change rather than supporting it. I think there's an onus on myself and my team to be making that happen, and as part of that there's an educational piece, because within the project and program management community, there's not that consistent understanding of the fact that we ought to be there to shape rather than support. And often plans are produced that get releases or whatever it might be delivered, and then everything else needs to slot in around it, as opposed to having that equal balance.
No, I think that's right. Are any other lessons you've learned that you think would be relevant for the group as a whole? You want to highlight one or two?
I think that we've sometimes got it right in terms of getting change in early on, but that's happened less often than it ought to have done. I think we're getting better at forecasting ahead in terms of what the capabilities that we need across the delivery of a project or program, and making sure that we get the right people in the right place at the right time, versus what we have sometimes done and have had to change as an afterthought, or where we have had change on board early on, a lot of the activity has been pushed close in or around go live, when actually change can begin very early on, because like you say, it's about launching as opposed to we've got a release in 12 or 18 months time.
Good, thank you. Now,
so I was just going to say, so coming at it from kind of the comms element, I can see so much of what we've been saying, because of course, as the person sort of leading on the comms, I'm often using those change artifacts, and if they've not been done with that sort of people-centric approach and is just a tick box exercise, and I have seen that, then they're not useful documents for me to draw on when I'm looking at creating the comm strategy, because it just misses things. And I've seen that happen where it just doesn't feel like, it just does feel like a tick box exercise. You know, you've got all these artifacts. And it just, so I can certainly see that. But just one thing, that major, the what might be major on slide, I really like that as a bit of a framework. Actually, that's a really good slide, because it just sort of talks about that change capacity, and then, you know, right down to sort of that enablement. I think that's a really good slide, by the way.
Thank you. Well, we will be distributing all slides as well as giving you a link to watch anything back. Thank you. Mark, you something else? And mute.
A lot of the time, I think what happens is that we know where we are and we know where we want to be, but they miss out the middle ground in working hard on defining how to actually get there. And I think a lot of it is kind of like incremental iteration, which is costly and ineffective. And I think that middle part is the important part, and certainly in terms of getting people to buy in to the change as well, rather than just saying, look, we're going to implement this new system. You know, getting the end users more involved and getting their buy-in, I think is crucial. And I think very often it's just like, well, here's a new system, here's a bit of training, off you go. And rather than using the opportunity to streamline processes and procedures, very often you just replicate what you did originally, but with a new system, which is bit of a waste of time really, but very often that is driven by the fact that the existing system is going out of support or out of life.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And that sense of doing not just doing the right thing, but also doing things right, getting the how, would be one way we'd phrase it. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And anything else anybody want to offer or ask?
Yes, Nick. I
Right.
really like the practical steps that you gave at the end. Could you perhaps elaborate that and give an example of how those practical steps were put into practice in a client engagement where it affected the outcomes?
Let me try and do that. I'll quickly put the slide back. Well, maybe not quickly, but I will put the slide back up again. So on the first one, I think, as I think you said, Patrick, it's challenging to get to the table sometimes. And there is an education for program or transformation leads. I think the place I've seen it work best was working with a program director, hugely talented guy who got that. And what it looked like when he did that was that any decision around movement in timescales, any decision about how we would group go live, for example, was done with the change people in the room providing advice. It wasn't the change people got to, call all the shots clearly and appropriately, but nevertheless we were there. So it was about how the program was set up and how the program was led. In integrating change activity, I'm thinking of one project where we're working with the client lead at the moment to reorganize the team. So instead of saying, well, there's this work stream, there's this work stream, there's this work stream with a different change manager for each one, we're revisiting, okay, how would we structure the team? Could we have a team with different emphases in the people who are part of it so that we can work closer together? So I think that, and again, you said, Patrick, about getting the right people in the right place at the right time. There's something about that as one way to do that. Telling a story, I think, is just a constant thing. I was talking with a couple of our consultants yesterday, and just getting them to articulate what would the outline narrative be for what they're working on, and encouraging them to keep that front of mind the whole time they're doing their work, and having it available for other people to bounce off. We did one project where we were bringing together two different functions within an organization, and we developed a change narrative, the story of what was going on, building on the stories of the two discrete organizations or functions that were coming together. And because we made sure we got that right at the outset, it was still there 18 months later when the organizations actually came together with a new operating model and a new structure, and was in the forefront of what we said about what we were doing. So getting that done early really matters. Building relationships, we major on deploying people who wouldn't always get deployed as consultants. We have people working at the moment in one organization with people who put spades in the ground. And this is one of the people I'm thinking of in particular, spent 25 years as part of those kind of organizations. And so normally when people go out to tell them about change that's coming, new systems, new process, that impact community kind of behaves suspiciously and warily because they feel they've been done over in the past. They feel that anybody, particularly from outside the organization, really doesn't understand them. And when he says, well, actually, no, I do understand, because I was part of you, the mood shifts almost immediately. Think of another instance where we made a point of going to a far away location where only a few people worked at the start of the night shift. Not because they were the most important community, but because we wanted it to be known and seen that we took the time to go to where people were and to build relationship with them. and that word got out. That was a small thing right down in the West Country. And stop ticking boxes, I think, is just about. We have conversations with some clients before we start saying, listen, we are bringing a resolute focus on those impacted by change. If we feel we're going to get dragged inwards, we're going to have a conversation with you about the value of what we're doing. One way of doing it. The other is actually to place more emphasis on the artifacts, because a really good change impact assessment can be hugely valuable in shaping what you do next. Benefit mapping can be hugely useful in checking that you're doing the things, whether it's about process or functionality, ways of working or whatever, that will deliver the benefits people want. So taking the artifacts seriously rather than as tick boxes or rather than ignoring them can also be useful. We've done that in a couple of projects. So a long answer, Brad, but I hope helpful in terms of examples.
Yes, very helpful. Thank you.
Now,
Hi, Nick. I just wondered, with the kind of AI wave here or coming, do you have any kind of, I guess, advice or insight for companies? Because in terms of kind of some of these making that more human-centric or more people-orientated,
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think. It's really, in a way, technology is moving so fast,
yeah.
and kind of it's just such a massive part of everything at the moment.
So that's probably worthy of a webinar in its own right. Ruth, you might think about that one. I very, very briefly, I think one, we have to find ways to use AI to allow us to do more of the added value tasks. And I'd put some of the relationship building and the being with those impacted by change in that category. Second, I think we would do well to let AI be used by those to help professionals in particular areas do their job in different and new ways rather than amateurs picking it up. So one example, I was talking to our creative director at the end of last week about the use of, I don't know if you've seen all these action models, action figures people have been generating with AI.
The doll, the Mattel kind of doll.
Which leave me mildly uncomfortable in terms of environmental impact of all that. But actually, we were talking about how there's a really interesting opportunity prompted by that to think about picturing, and I mean literally picturing people impacted by change in the new environment. Getting AI to create that and place people in the story, to place people in the future vision. And I'd conclude that we would do well to have our creative people doing that rather than me picking it up and thinking I can do that. In other words, let's have the tools used by those who will get most value from using them. I think I'd probably highlight those two things. So,
yeah. I would agree with that actually, because I actually almost think that when you already have a knowledge base, I think you can get the most out of the AI tools rather than being fresh and just going, oh, well, AI says must be right, therefore I'll just run with it. I think it's really nice that we can look at what AI is generating very critically and go, actually, that doesn't strike the right tone, or the nuance based on the conversation I had with so-and-so the other day when I was building that relationship, that doesn't strike true, so I would definitely change that or to flip that around. So yeah, no, I would definitely agree.
And I agree with that as a general point about using AI. I know 100%. That I'll ask Ruth in the team to hey Ruth, can you pull together a summary of whatever? And I say to Carl and the team, hey Carl, can you pull together a summary of? I'm going to get two very different things.
For sure.
And I need to understand the perspective from which the AI tool is coming.
Yeah.
Because bluntly, I don't want AI tools that reflect either, or summaries that reflect either 18-year-olds who know very little and a very little life experience, nor do I want AI tools that reflect white men in their 50s. We need to be careful what we're getting.
Definitely, and all the ethics behind it as well. So
yeah.
I think there's such an incredible
we might come back
revolution in the way we're working, almost like like when the internet came out, like suddenly we're on the internet, just changed. You're thinking about offices many years ago, what they look like and what they look like now. And I
Yeah.
just, it's just,
Yeah.
it's almost like, it feels like, AI is almost one of the main, this
Mm.
is, the main changes
Mm.
coming through. So I was just interested. Thank you. Yeah. And I will
Yeah,
look forward to a
thank
webinar if you do that.
Yeah, I'm sure
Well
we
done.
will do. I'm sure we will. Yeah. Sorry, I should have switched off that screen. Well, looking at the time, we may have time for one more point, one more question, because I want to respect the time we said we'd take for this. Any final questions, thoughts? Edna, hi.
Hi, Nick. Thank you very much for that presentation. Mine is actually a comment. I
Yeah.
had a difficult time joining, and I couldn't see
So-
your presentation.
Oh, you've gone muted now. And you're still muted, Edna.
The conversation all by myself. I
Yeah.
asked my questions, answered, and laughed at myself. I was just going to say thank you for that presentation. I couldn't see the presentation initially, but
Yeah.
that last slide, truly, Pinal, as you said, that is a summary of what we're all going through at the moment. So thank you for I think it
Thank
was
you.
Mark that asked for it to be reshared. My key takeaway, my quote from you today, Nick, is what you said about get away from toolbox and start using recipes. I just
Okay,
found
thank
that
you.
as the quotes for the month, I think for the month of April. And if you don't mind,
Oh, thank
I'll
you.
steal it with pride.
Do absolutely.
So
That's
thank you.
good. Well, look, but please do anything that you want to come back to us on after the webinar. Please do be in touch with us. As I say, we'll distribute the slides and a link to recording of it. We value talking with people who are active in change. Because it gives us a sense of the perspectives and the challenges that people in our market are working with and around. So we're always very, very happy to have conversations with the meter off, just so that we learn. And if we share any insights, we do that, we're delighted. So thank you. Thank you. Have a good rest of the day and hope to continue conversations with many of you. Thank you very much indeed. See
Thank you very
next-
much.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much. Bye,
Cheers.
everyone.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you.